2003 national champion at Syracuse, a 10-time All-Star, 10th on NBA's all-time scoring list, 3-time gold medal winner, member of NBA's 75th anniversary team. That's just a few of the accomplishments on Carmelo Anthony's resume that have him getting enshrined in the Basketball Hall of Fame this weekend. I'm excited to talk to someone that has witnessed Melo's first ballot Hall of Fame career every step of the way. Started as a student manager at Syracuse for the 2003 national championship team, to covering him starting in 2005. ESPN's NBA reporter, Dave McMenamin. Dave, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
Dave, I'm going to start. For the dummies out there that question Melo being a first ballot Hall of Famer, you say.
They just don't know the sport. They don't know the Basketball Hall of Fame credentials, and they certainly aren't taking into account the entire basketball journey that Carmelo Anthony was on. High school All-American down in Baltimore, Oak Hill Academy. Obviously, his accomplishments at Syracuse stand for themselves. The most points ever for a freshman in that program, the first ever freshman player to be named most outstanding player of the NCAA Final Four, the championship, of course. And then, as you mentioned, a 19-year NBA career. There's been close to 5,000 players, anywhere between 4,800 and 5,000. The numbers aren't quite accurate because it's hard to track all the players that ever put on an NBA uniform back in the 50s and 60s. But let's say 5,000. There's been 5,000 NBA players. He's 10th all time scoring. Like, that is the elite of the elite of the elite. And so while his NBA resume certainly doesn't have an NBA championship on it, we'll get into that, the reasons why that doesn't have that. You add up his time coming into the NBA, throw in the Olympic performance, third all time in Olympic scoring with the NBA performance. He is no brainer as it gets when it comes to deserving a spot in Springfield.
Dave, you have a great article on ESPN that came out on Thursday talking about some of the what-ifs in Carmelo's career. And a lot of those what-ifs would have led to championships. A ring that you mentioned, doesn't have on his resume, even though he's got a lot more on there. Do you think that he would have won? So two of the biggest ones were drafted by the Pistons second overall and teaming up with LeBron and D-Wade in Miami. Those were two things that were possible for Melo. Do you think he would have had more championships if he was drafted by the Pistons or went to Miami?
I mean, I'll go to Chauncey Billups, right? I spoke to Chauncey Billups for the story. He told me he feels like that team, which won one championship in 2004, which was the end of Carmelo's rookie season. He said that we would have won three championships at least if Carmelo Anthony was on our team rather than Darko Milicic. And of course, there would be a cascading effect. Maybe they never trade for Rasheed Wallace that season, and he was such a big part of their championship success. What he was able to do in the finals, pulling Shaq away from the paint as a stretch five, and even Tayshaun Prince's development maybe would have been stunted having Carmelo Anthony on that team as well. But the sheer talent, obviously, combined with Ben Wallace and Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton, that team would have been certainly formidable. And they made it to two NBA finals, six Eastern Conference finals. I don't think it's absurd to agree with Chauncey and say maybe not three, but let's say multiple championships, right? So that would have been right off the bat. Then we're talking about Melo with the first guy in the 2003 draft class to get a ring, and not Dwayne Wade, who won it in 2006, and he ended up being the first guy. And of course, LeBron James and Chris Bosh joined him. And then, obviously, that's the next huge what if. In 2006, if Carmelo Anthony doesn't sign a 5-year extension and he is patient and listens to what Dwayne and Chris Bosh and LeBron are doing, sign a shorter extension so he can line up his free agency for the summer of 2010, he's going to be in his prime of his career playing with one of his contemporaries, who all those guys are going to be, in the hall as well. Dwayne's already in, Chris Bosh is already in, LeBron's going to get in 4 years from whenever he retires. There would have been a ring there as well, in my opinion. And so those are a couple of what ifs, but I got some more for you if you got time. There's a couple of what ifs that I had written in the story that we cut for space.
Give me one. What's the one that stands out to you?
So how about the what if scenario involving the Lakers? So let's just start with the 2009 Western Conference Finals. He gets the Nuggets there as a 24-year-old. They are in a 1-1 series through the first two games. Melo's averaging 35 points for the first two games. The game that they lose ends in the last 30 seconds. They're down by 2 with the ball, inbounding it at Staples Center, a chance to tie the game down by 2. Trevor Ariza steals the inbounds pass. Fast forward to game 3, same thing happens. Down 2, 37 seconds to go. Now playing at home, Kenyon Martin tries to throw it to Carmelo Anthony. Trevor Ariza steals the inbounds pass. So let's just say those two defensive plays don't happen. They could be up 3-0 on the Lakers. That was a great Lakers team, but I don't know if they're coming back from 3-0. And then another Lakers scenario in 2011, before Melo was traded to the New York Knicks, he said on a podcast this summer that there was a deal in place that would have had Andrew Bynum and Lamar Odom being sent to Denver for Nene Hilario and Carmelo Anthony coming to the Lakers. That's another chance you could have won a ring. You know, Melo's version of events says that George Karl didn't really want to have Melo in the Western Conference at that point, and so they ended up going the Knicks package. But man, I mean, now we're rattling off all these scenarios that it didn't really go Melo's way. Instead, he kind of took it on himself to become one of the most lethal scorers in NBA history. And I would submit that you don't win championships individually in this league. You just don't. And while he played with some great players, he played with Chauncey after his prime in Denver, Kenyon Martin after his prime in Denver. When he played for the New York Knicks, it was Jason Kidd after his prime. It was Amari Stoudemire after knee surgery. It was Tyson Chandler after his prime. Had he played with those players when they were both, or all those players were in the prime of their career, maybe we're singing a different tune. But that just is the way the cookie crumbled for Melo.
Right, and instead of any of those what ifs, I want to talk about what did go down, and he gets traded to New York. And that was at a time where nobody really wanted to play in New York. Do you think, or do you even know, is that a move that has been respected by Melo's peers, or do they ask him, like, why wouldn't you go join a super team and go get that ring at a time that it was just so popular to do so?
Yeah, I mean, certainly both Pau Gasol and Chauncey Billups mentioned when I were talking to them for the story that they really did respect the way Carmelo handled himself, the path he took in his career. Yeah, I think there is always a kind of old school mentality of if you're willing to go to your own and have people come to you, in a sense, that just gets more respect. Now, I think the player empowerment era has been very important for the league. I've covered LeBron James's teams now for the last 11 seasons, and I think to discredit a player for taking some agency in the path that he goes down, I don't think really makes too much sense, because so often we see teams' front offices not necessarily care about the player's fate. However, to finish with that sidebar, Melo's kind of pathway was twofold. In the NBA, he was one of the gunslingers, a guy who could get you 30 any given night, scored 62 in a game in the Garden. But then when he played in the context of the Olympics around elite talent, he was all about winning. So it wasn't a guy who was trying to get his numbers at the sake of winning. So long as he had a chance to win, those were his winning instincts. He just didn't have enough in the NBA context to win it all.
Going to rewind a little bit now and go back to his Syracuse career. And you mentioned in your article, it was at the top of your article, you talked to Hakeem Warwick, who is a teammate of Melo's at Syracuse, has probably the biggest play in Syracuse basketball, if not Syracuse sports history, the block in the corner during the championship. He said his reaction when he first saw him at practice was, this little chubby dude is who everybody is hyped about. Did you have that same reaction as a manager on that team when you first saw Carmelo Anthony?
No, no. I mean, let's make one thing clear for any of your readers or viewers here. Akeem Warwick, his literally like his Yahoo email is Skinny War. So Akeem is a very real thin, skinny guy. So he was probably judging me for being too chubby as well. However, my earliest memories, I was a manager for the Syracuse basketball team of Carmelo, was the elite skill level that he had at his size. Because the year prior was my freshman year at Syracuse. That Syracuse team didn't make the NCAA tournament. They made a run in the NIT, but you were talking about guys like Billy Seelick and Ethan Cole as the big men on that team. Not a lot of talent for their size. They did the best that they could. But then you have a guy in Carmelo who comes in, same height as an Ethan Cole, but the guard skills of Deshaun Williams, who had been had been in Syracuse the year before, or the outside shooting touch of a Preston Shumpert. And so it was like kind of unsettling. It almost didn't seem real. I was like, how can this guy with this elite size have such great body control? And then, yeah, you did think he had the chubby cheeks, but all of a sudden he could leap out of the gym as well. And so you're like, he's an elite athlete, kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will.
What's the first moment, whether it was from a practice or from a game, that you just I don't if everybody maybe turned to each other and was like, "Oh my God, this guy is legit. This guy is exactly what everybody's been so hyped about."
I mean, the first moment that I remember was being in the Syracuse basketball office and watching the McDonald's All American game before he came to practice, and all of us kind of getting excited about it. Seeing him in person, the memory that sticks out, I wish I could like peg it to an exact moment of the season, but at some point throughout the year, Todd Forcier, who was the team's strength and conditioning coach, who ended up being a strength and conditioning coach in the NBA, and whose brother Chad Forcier has been a longtime NBA assistant coach, started to work with Carmelo more after practice, and it was, I think, Melo was paying attention because he knew that Todd had kind of seen the other side of like, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is what my brother's telling me that NBA players are doing. This will give you a little bit more preparation and seasoning for when you are in the NBA. And so he would stay after practice and sprint 3 point line to 3 point line and had to make catch and shoot threes. And I can't remember exactly the number. And I think maybe it grew progressively from the point of the season when he started doing it onward. But, he was surrounded by some maniacal workers. Jerry McNamara had one of the best work ethics of any NBA, excuse me, Syracuse freshman I was around in my 4 years around that team. Carmelo saw Jerry putting in work after practice, and he was doing it himself, and particularly working on the 3 point shot is what I remember. And I was like, wow, you already had all the other things. He was already showing the signs of the jab series. He could already dominate the glass. He averaged 10 rebounds a game at Syracuse. Obviously, could play above the rim. And now here you are getting your conditioning elite by sprinting after practice and also working on your 3 point touch. And I thought his 3 pointer, I think he shot around 33% in his freshman season at Syracuse, but it was such a dynamic part of his package in the NCAA tournament in particular. And so just kind of that's my memory thinking back just where he was not satisfied with how well he was already playing, how well the team was already playing, and that extra work paying off dividends in the tournament.
Carmelo wasn't the only Hall of Fame basketball mind on the Syracuse team, obviously. Head coach Jim Boeheim. Do you remember a time where those two may have been bumping heads? Because you got these two Hall of Fame minds. They probably both want to do it their specific way. We know how Coach Boeheim is. Is there a memory of those two going at it during practice, saying, I'm going to do it my way?
I actually don't. I mean, the thing about Coach, he is very trusting of the talent that he brings in. He knows what he wants in his program, and if you line up and your skill set lines up, he gives you a lot of freedom. Now, the one thing Coach didn't love was too much dribbling out of Melo. You wanted him to get it and go because you knew he could finish at the rim or draw contact and get to the free throw line. But and if you're going to get to your jab series, that's fine. But once you put the ball on the floor, you better be doing something with it, not just dribbling in place or trying to break down a guy off the dribble when you could just do your first initial thrust towards the hoop. So that was like very simple stuff. Like it was not arguments, it was tweaking and instruction and kind of nudging him in the direction that he knew he could be so effective with. So it was a pretty easy relationship there. And then, Troy Weaver, who's now the one of the front office members of the New Orleans Pelicans, a longtime NBA career himself, he was kind of the coach that identified Melo as a young talent in Baltimore, was heavily involved in recruiting, and Weave would do a lot of the skill work with Melo in practice. But coach, the view I saw was just a ton of trust thrust into the hands of not only Melo as a freshman, but Jerry McNamara. And yeah, I think that's why that team is kind of so special and remarkable all these years later, because you had one senior in Quet Duaney, and then you had a bunch of young guys, but a bunch of young guys and Josh Pace, Craig Forth, Billy Edelin, obviously the other guys we mentioned, Akeem, Mello, and GMAC, who really had a good willingness to play together with one another, and certainly a tough competitive streak.
Dave, I'm from Syracuse. I went to Syracuse, so hearing these stories make my day. When you're from Syracuse, Syracuse basketball is the team. We might be a few years removed from it. We want to get back to the days of when the city would shut down. The city would stop when Syracuse basketball had a big game. It was the talk of the town. So I want to keep going down a Syracuse basketball rabbit hole. I can't help myself here. I'm interested in your role when you were there in 2003. Take me back to the national championship game. Before the game, layup lines. Are you rebounding? Are you walking on eggshells knowing how big this is for Carmelo Anthony, how big it is for Jim Boeheim, who needed that championship? What is your feeling on the day of the national championship in 2003?
So I was a sophomore, and we had two senior managers, basically the way the program was set up, my first few years, we have thus from this time expanded the manager program, but it was only two senior managers who would travel. So Jonathan Sandgarden and Chris Console were great mentors to me. They were kind of my bosses. They were the two senior managers, so they were there on the court pregame, helping with rebounding and stuff, and then changing into their suits and sitting behind the bench at down in New Orleans. I had a ticket, and so I was behind the basket to the right, about maybe 20 rows up from the corner where Michael Lee shot was blocked by Kim Warwick. So I had a beautiful view, but I was there wearing an orange t-shirt as a fan. And then obviously after the game, go back to the team hotel. I was staying with Craig Forth and our walk-on Andrew Cowie
Sure.
in their hotel room. They both had beds. I had a cot. I was crashing with them for the tournament down in New Orleans.
Big Craig Forth isn't able to crash on a cot. He needed that bed.
Yeah,
He was not.
that's right. He needed that bed.
Yeah, he needed that one. Was there anything that you learned about Carmelo Anthony writing this article, talking to Chauncey Billups, Pau Gasol, or like I mentioned at the start, you've been there throughout his entire career from Syracuse throughout a 19-year NBA career. Was it like the back of your hand?
A couple things that stood out to me. Like one little detail that I loved talking to Coach Boeheim about was obviously we know that Carmelo scored so much during the Olympics, but he said he was so good at boxing out off and getting missed free throw rebounds. Such a really small thing, right? But if you have that particular skill set and you're bringing that to a team that has the best talent in the world, it's a tangible example of you doing just a little bit more to try to give that team some more success. So we know he's going to score a bunch of points, but I just love that detail that Coach Boeheim picked up on. And then also sticking with his USA time, I spoke to Jason Kidd, and Jason talked about how special Carmelo is off the court and kind of his presence being instrumental to bringing that team together camaraderie wise, because you had Kobe kind of as a lone wolf, and he had 6 or 7 years of age on that 2003 group of LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Carmelo, of course. And so Carmelo was the guy, according to Jason Kidd, who bridged that gap between Kobe and LeBron, who were kind of the two alphas on the team, and brought the group together. And how fitting is it that also this weekend in Springfield, that 2008 Redeem team is going to be honored as a team inducted into the Hall of Fame. Carmelo's fingerprints were all over the success of that team as well.
I know you're going to be at the ceremony this weekend. Is there something during Carmelo Anthony's speech you're going to be keeping an eye on? You want him to mention? You think he might mention? What are you going to be keeping an eye on during his speech?
I love that he is having Dwayne Wade and Allen Iverson be his presenters. I think that's such a cool wrinkle to the Hall of Fame process. I'm always fascinated to see the guys and what players that they choose. Obviously, Carmelo played with Iverson. That's another guy, another all-time great. He didn't get the prime of Allen Iverson when he played with him in Denver, but to me, it's like he got a little bit of the Wade side of him in his career. In terms of being this guy who was team focused and who was, really respected as one of the best, just X's and O's. This guy is just cold and a true professional when it comes to executing in basketball. And then I think he has a little bit of the Allen Iverson in him. Melo was more than just an NBA star. He was a bit of a cultural figure in his time. Obviously, his relationship with Lala, who was VH1, VJ or MTV VJ, I should say. He was, people would care about what he was wearing and who he was with and where he was seen, et cetera, et cetera. I think to see him or hear him touch on kind of both of those sides, I will be curious to see if we learn something.
We're okay with the Georgetown guy presenting him?
I think we're okay.
All right,
We're
fine,
okay.
fine.
Yeah,
We'll deal with
yeah,
it. All right. Well,
yeah.
thank you very much, Dave. I know Knicks fans are going to be watching Saturday. I know Syracuse fans will be involved watching on Saturday, and I know you'll be there. So thank you, and good luck for you Eagles, I guess, tonight.
Appreciate it. Next time.